The knife was shaking in my 72-year-old hands when I heard my own son tell his wife that I was nothing but a burden me needed to get rid of, and honey, those words cut deeper than any blade ever could. There I was, standing in my own kitchen that I'd scrubbed clean for 43 years, holding the birthday cake I'd baked myself because nobody else bothered, and my family was planning to throw me away like yesterday's garbage. Y'all, I need to back up just a little bit so you understand how we got to this moment, because what happened next changed everything, and I mean everything, about my life. My name is Margaret Eleanor Whitman, and I've been living in the same little house in Spokane, Washington since 1978. Built it with my late husband, Robert, God rest his soul, and we raised 3 children in that home. 3 ungrateful, money-hungry children who apparently forgot that Mama still has ears that work just fine. It was my 72nd birthday, September 15th, and I had been planning this little celebration for weeks. Nothing fancy, mind you, just wanted my family together in the house that love built. I'd spent my Social Security check on ingredients for Robert's famous chocolate cake recipe, the one the kids used to beg for every birthday when they were little. Honey, I was so excited I could barely sleep the night before, thinking about seeing my grandchildren's faces light up when they tasted that cake. But sweetie, let me tell you what really happened when they walked through my door that Tuesday afternoon. My son Michael, 45 years old and wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, barely looked at me when he came in. His wife Jessica followed behind him with this sour expression like she'd been sucking on lemons all morning. And my granddaughter Emma, sweet little Emma, who used to call me her favorite person in the whole world, she had her face buried in that phone like I wasn't even there. You know what the first warning sign should have been when Michael walked straight past me without even saying happy birthday and started looking around the house like he was taking inventory. I heard him whisper to Jessica about the crown molding and whether the hardwood floors were original. My heart started beating faster right then, but I pushed those worried thoughts down deep and focused on being the perfect hostess. I'd set the dining room table with my good china, the wedding set that Robert's mother gave us in 1969. Every plate was polished until it sparkled. Every fork was perfectly aligned, and I'd even picked fresh roses from my garden for the centerpiece. The house smelled like chocolate and vanilla and all those warm spices that make a home feel like love. I was wearing my nicest dress, the navy blue one with the little pearl buttons that Robert always said made my eyes shine. But honey, when I called everyone to the table, you could feel the tension thick as molasses. Michael kept checking his watch every 30 seconds. Jessica was sighing like she was doing me some huge favor by being there. And Emma never looked up from that glowing screen. I tried to make conversation, asking about Emma's school and Jessica's job at the marketing firm, but every answer was shorter than a grocery list. Before I tell you what happened next, and sweetie, this part is going to absolutely shock you. If you're loving this story, smash that subscribe button and hit that bell. You know I get so excited when I see y'all in the comments. Speaking of which, what state are you calling home right now? Drop it down below. And honey, tell me, have you ever had family treat you like you didn't matter? Because your stories help me know I'm not alone in this crazy world. Now let me tell you what I discovered next, because what they did was about to backfire in the most beautiful way. So there we were, sitting around my dining room table like strangers at a bus stop, and I decided to bring out the birthday cake. Y'all, I was still trying to salvage this celebration, still believing that maybe once they saw how much effort I'd put in, how much love I'd baked into every layer, they'd remember that they were supposed to love me too. I lit those 72 candles one by one, and you could see the golden light dancing across the chocolate frosting I'd spent 3 hours perfecting. I made a wish. Lord help me, I wished for my family to be happy and healthy, and for us to have many more birthdays together. Then I picked up that silver cake knife, the one Robin and I used to cut our wedding cake 51 years ago, and I started making the first slice. The cake was perfect, honey, absolutely perfect. 3 layers of moist chocolate with cream cheese frosting, just the way Robert used to make it. But the moment I set that first piece on Michael's plate, something in the air shifted like a storm was coming. He looked at Jessica, she looked at him, and they both looked at me with these expressions I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, like I was a problem they needed to solve instead of the woman who'd given them everything I had. That's when I heard it. Michael thought I'd gone into the kitchen to get the ice cream, but I was right there in the doorway when he leaned over to Jessica and said, "We need to move fast on this house situation. She's getting more confused every day, and if we wait much longer, she might do something stupid with the property." Honey, my blood went colder than a Montana winter. I stood there frozen, listening to my own son talk about me like I was already dead and buried. Jessica nodded and whispered back, "The realtor said we could get at least $400,000 for this place in today's market. That's enough to put her in that assisted living place in Coeur d'Alene and still have plenty left over for Emma's college fund." Y'all, I couldn't believe what I was hearing with my own 2 ears. I had to grip the door frame to keep from falling over. My own son was planning to sell my house, without even asking me. And that assisted living place in Coeur d'Alene, I'd driven past it once. It looked like a prison with flower boxes. I walked back into that dining room with the ice cream container shaking in my hands, trying to act normal while my whole world was crashing down around me. But you know what? I'm 72 years old, and I didn't survive the loss of my husband, raising 3 kids mostly alone, and 40 years of night shifts at the hospital just to let my family steamroll me in my own home. I set that ice cream down with maybe a little more force than necessary and looked my son straight in the eye. "Michael, honey, is there something you want to tell Mama about my house?" The silence that followed was longer than a Sunday sermon. Michael's face went red as a fire truck, and Jessica started studying her nail polish like they held the secrets of the universe. Little Emma finally looked up from her phone, sensing the tension even through her teenage fog. "What are you talking about, Ma?" Michael said, but his voice had that guilty shake that I recognized from when he was 7 years old and broke my favorite lamp. "I'm talking about the conversation I just heard about selling my house and putting me in some facility like I'm a piece of furniture you need to store somewhere." The explosion that followed was like nothing I'd ever experienced in my own home. Michael jumped up from his chair so fast it nearly toppled over, pointing his finger at me like I was a naughty child. "You were eavesdropping on a private conversation." "In my own house," I shot back, and honey, my voice was getting stronger with every word. "This is my home, bought and paid for with my husband's life insurance money and my nursing salary. Every brick, every board, every doorknob belongs to me." That's when Jessica decided to show her true colors. She stood up real slow and smooth, like a snake uncoiling, and looked at me with pure venom in her eyes. "Margaret, we're only thinking about what's best for you. You're getting older. You can't maintain this place properly. And frankly, you're becoming a burden on Michael's family." A burden. She called me a burden in my own home on my own birthday? Y'all, I felt something break inside my chest that had nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with my spirit. Here was this woman who'd married into my family, who'd never worked a day of manual labor in her life, calling me a burden. "Jessica, sweetie," I said, and my voice was dripping with all the irony you could imagine. The day I become a burden to anyone is the day I'll dance on my own grave, but today is not that day. Michael stepped between us like he was breaking up a bar fight. Ma, you're being unreasonable. We've been talking to elder care services, and they think assisted living would be perfect for you. You'd have people to take care of you, activities, meals provided. Prison, I interrupted him. You mean prison, with crafts and jello. That's when things got really ugly. Michael's face twisted up like he'd been holding back these words for years. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, we think you should sell this house. Yes, we think you need professional care. And yes, we are tired of pretending that you're still capable of living independently when half the time you can't even remember to take your medication. Honey, those words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were true. My mind is sharp as a tack and always has been. But because my own son was willing to lie about my mental state to justify stealing my home? I could feel those tears threatening to spill over, but I'd be damned if I'd give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Get out, I whispered, then louder, get out of my house. But instead of leaving like decent people would, they started laughing. All three of them. Even little Emma, who was recording the whole thing on her phone like it was some kind of entertainment. They were laughing at me, at my tears, at my pain, at everything I'd given them for 72 years of life. That's when Michael pulled out his phone and made a call that changed everything. Hi, this is Michael Whitman. We discussed my mother's situation last week. Right, Margaret Whitman on Maple Street. I think we need to move forward with the evaluation. She's having an episode right now, threatening us, completely irrational. Y'all, I couldn't believe he was calling someone to report me for having an episode when he was the one stealing my house and lying about my mental condition. But what happened next was so much worse than I could have imagined. While Michael was on that phone, Jessica walked over to my purse, reached right in like she owned it, and pulled out my house keys. My keys to my house. When I tried to grab them back, she held them high above her head like we were children playing keep-away. These are going into safekeeping until you come to your senses, she announced like she was a judge pronouncing sentence. That's when the most humiliating part happened. They physically escorted me, their 72-year-old mother and grandmother, out of my own house. Michael took one arm, Jessica took the other, and they walked me to the front door like I was a drunk being thrown out of a bar. You can sleep in your car tonight if you want, Michael said as he locked my door with my keys. And then they left. They got in their fancy car and drove away, leaving me standing on my own front porch in my birthday dress, locked out of my home that I'd lived in for 44 years. The cake was still sitting on the table inside. All those candles burned down to nothing, and I couldn't even get in to clean up the mess. But honey, what they didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly known because they'd never bothered to really know me, was that Margaret Eleanor Whitman doesn't go down without a fight. Not at 72, not at 92, not ever. I walked to my neighbor Mrs. Patterson's house, still wearing that navy dress with the pearl buttons, and knocked on her door. Gladys Patterson has lived next door to me for 28 years, and she took one look at my face and knew something was terribly wrong. Margaret, honey, what happened? Why aren't you inside celebrating? So I told her everything, every word, every lie, every humiliation. And you know what Gladys did? She made me a cup of coffee, gave me her spare room for the night, and then she said something that changed the whole game. You know, Margaret, my nephew Danny is a lawyer, specializes in elder rights and property law. And sweetie, what your family just did isn't just morally wrong, it might be legally wrong too. That night, lying in Gladys's guest bed, I started planning. Not just my next move, but my complete and total comeback. Because if there's one thing life taught me during all those years of night shifts and emergencies and crises, it's that every problem has a solution if you're smart enough to find it. The next morning, I was sitting in Danny Patterson's law office downtown, still wearing yesterday's birthday dress, but with a fire in my belly that could have powered the whole city. Danny was a sharp young man, maybe 35, with kind eyes and the sort of serious expression that told me he wasn't going to dismiss my problems just because I was an older woman. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, after I'd told him the whole story, "what your family did yesterday constitutes several potential crimes: theft, elder abuse, unlawful detention, and possibly conspiracy to commit fraud." My heart started beating faster with something that felt like hope for the first time in 24 hours. What does that mean exactly? It means we're going to get your keys back, we're going to get you back in your house, and we're going to make sure this never happens again. But first, Danny explained, we needed evidence. Good thing Emma was recording everything on her phone and posting it to social media. That little video of them laughing at me while I cried, that was evidence of elder abuse. Michael's phone call where he lied about my mental state, Gladys had heard the whole thing from her kitchen window. Jessica taking my keys, that was theft, plain and simple. "Here's what we're going to do," Danny said, and honey, you could hear the justice just bubbling up in his voice. "We're going to file a police report, get a temporary restraining order, and then we're going to make your family understand that stealing from elderly people isn't just wrong, it's a felony." The first stop was the Spokane Police Department. I walked into that station wearing my best suit, the black one I usually save for funerals, carrying a folder of documents that proved I owned my house free and clear. The officer who took my report was a woman about my daughter's age, and when I told her what happened, her face got harder with every word. "Ma'am, this is serious. Your son can't just lock you out of your own property and claim you're incompetent without a court order and a proper medical evaluation. What he did is criminal." Within 2 hours, I had a police escort back to my own house. 2 patrol cars pulled up to 1247 Maple Street, and those officers knocked on my door with enough authority to wake the dead. Michael answered in his pajamas, looking confused and angry, until he saw me standing behind the officers. "Sir, we need you to return Mrs. Whitman's house keys immediately. She is the legal owner of this property, and you have no right to deny her access to her own home."
Y'all, you should have seen Michael's face when he realized that his little plan to steamroll his mama had backfired spectacularly. His mouth kept opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, and he kept looking at me like he couldn't believe I'd actually called the police on him. "Officers, my mother is confused. She's not capable of—" "Sir," the female officer interrupted, "we've reviewed Mrs. Whitman's medical records with her permission, and we've spoken to her doctor. She shows no signs of dementia, confusion, or mental incapacity. Now please return her keys." When Michael finally handed over my keys, his hands were shaking almost as much as mine had been when I was cutting that birthday cake. But honey, this time I was shaking with pure satisfaction instead of hurt and fear. But getting back into my house was just the beginning. Danny Patterson had bigger plans for making sure my family learned their lesson about respecting their elders. The next phase of our plan started the following Monday. See, while Michael and Jessica were planning to steal my house and put me in a home, they'd forgotten one tiny detail about their mama. I'd been working in hospitals for 40 years. I knew how to document everything, I knew how to follow procedures, and I knew how to build a case that would stand up in court. Over the next 2 weeks, Danny and I gathered evidence like we were preparing for the trial of the century. We got Emma's social media posts where she shared the video of them laughing at me with captions like, "Grandma's having a meltdown, LOL." We got phone records showing Michael had called elder care services and lied about my condition. We even got witness statements from neighbors who'd seen them lock me out of my own house. But the real game changer came when Danny did a deep dive into Michael's finances. Turns out, my successful businessman son was in debt up to his eyeballs. His fancy house, mortgaged to the hilt. His expensive car, lease payments 3 months behind. Jessica's designer clothes and Emma's private school, all paid for with credit cards that were maxed out. "Mrs. Whitman," Danny said when he showed me the financial records, "your son wasn't just planning to put you in assisted living, he was planning to steal your house to save himself from bankruptcy." That's when we decided it was time for phase 2 of Margaret's revenge plan. The next family gathering was Thanksgiving, just 2 months after my birthday disaster. Michael called to ignite me like nothing had ever happened, probably hoping I'd forgiven and forgotten like the good little mama he expected me to be. But honey, Margaret Whitman has a memory like an elephant and a sense of justice like a biblical prophet. I accepted the invitation real sweet-like, told him I'd be bringing my famous green bean casserole and that I had some exciting news to share with the family. What I didn't tell him was that my exciting news was going to change all their lives forever. I showed up to their house at exactly noon, carrying my casserole dish and wearing my biggest smile. Jessica greeted me at the door with fake friendliness that was thicker than her makeup, and Emma actually hugged me like we were the best of friends. The whole house smelled like turkey and stuffing and lies. During dinner, I waited for the perfect moment. We were all sitting around their dining room table, the one they'd bought with money they didn't have, and Michael was going on and on about his business success and how well Emma was doing in school. That's when I cleared my throat and stood up. "Y'all, I have an announcement to make, and I want everyone to listen real carefully because this affects the whole family." Every face turned toward me with curiosity and just a little bit of concern. They probably thought I was going to announce some health problem or maybe that I'd decided to sell the house after all. Well, I want everyone to know that I've taken steps to clear up any future confusion about my competency or my wishes regarding my property and assets. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope that was thick with official-looking documents. I've had a complete medical and psychological evaluation done by 3 independent doctors. All 3 have certified that I am of sound mind and fully capable of managing my own affairs. The relief on their faces was almost comical. They probably thought I was about to hand them papers saying I decided to move to assisted living after all. I've also had my will updated and my estate planning reviewed by a lawyer who specializes in elder law. Now they were looking really interested. Dollar signs were practically dancing in their eyes as they imagined inheriting my house and whatever savings I might have. And finally, I continued, savoring this moment like fine wine, I've established a trust to ensure that my wishes are carried out exactly as I intend, regardless of what anyone else might think is best for me. I handed the envelope to Michael, who opened it with fingers that were already greedy for whatever good news might be inside. But as he started reading, his face went from eager to confused to absolutely horrified. What is this, Ma?" That, my dear son, is a restraining order preventing you, Jessica, or Emma from coming within 500 feet of my house or contacting me in any way for the next 6 months. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. Jessica's fork clattered to her plate, Emma's mouth fell open like a barn door, and Michael's face went through more color changes than a sunset. There's also, I continued, my voice getting stronger with every word, a cease and desist order preventing any of you from discussing my mental state, my property, or my personal business with anyone, including elder care services, real estate agents, or assisted living facilities. Now Jessica found her voice, and honey, it was not the sweet tone she'd been using when she wanted something from me. Margaret, you can't be serious. We're your family. You're right, Jessica. You are my family. And family doesn't lie about their grandmother's mental state to try to steal their house and put her in a home against her will. I pulled out another document from my purse, this one with an official seal that caught the light like a badge of honor. This is a sworn affidavit detailing every lie you told, every law you broke, and every way you tried to abuse and defraud a 72-year-old woman. It's been filed with the court and with the district attorney's office. Michael was on his feet now, his face red with anger and something that might have been panic. You called the DA? Ma, are you trying to get us arrested? Honey, I didn't try to get you arrested. You got yourselves in legal trouble the minute you decided to lock me out of my own house and lie about my mental condition. I just made sure there were consequences for your actions. But I wasn't done yet. Oh no, sweetie, I was just getting started. There's one more thing y'all need to know about Mama's new arrangements. I reached into my purse one more time and pulled out a business card. I've hired a private investigator to look into your finances, Michael. Turns out there are some very interesting irregularities in how you've been handling your business accounts. The blood drained from Michael's face so fast, I thought he might faint right there at the table. You what?
Honey, when you tried to have me declared incompetent, you opened up your whole family to legal scrutiny. And what my investigator found was, well, let's just say the IRS is very interested in having a conversation with you about some unreported income and some questionable deductions. Jessica stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. You vindictive old witch, how dare you destroy this family over a misunderstanding? But Emma, sweet little Emma, who'd been recording my humiliation on her phone 2 months earlier, surprised everyone by speaking up. Grandma, did Dad really try to steal your house? The room went deadly quiet as 3 generations of women looked at the man who was supposed to protect and provide for all of us. Yes, sweetheart, I said gently. Your father was planning to sell my house without my permission and put me in a home so he could use the money to pay his debts. Emma looked at her parents with disgust that was mature beyond her 17 years. That's stealing. That's elder abuse. We learned about that in health class. Michael tried to salvage the situation with explanations and justifications and all the usual lies that people tell when they've been caught red-handed. But honey, sometimes the truth is so clear that even a teenager can see through the excuses. We were thinking of what's best for her future. No, Dad, you were thinking about your debt. About the second mortgage you took out on our house, about the credit cards that keep getting declined. Y'all, Watching my son realize that his own daughter could see through his lies was almost heartbreaking. Almost. But not quite enough to make me forget 2 months of sleepless nights wondering if my own family was going to succeed in stealing everything I'd worked for. The Thanksgiving dinner ended with Michael and Jessica screaming at me, Emma crying in her room, and me calmly packing up my green bean casserole to take home. As I walked to my car, I could hear them inside fighting about money and blame and whose fault it all was. But the real satisfaction came 3 weeks later when Danny Patterson called me with news that made my whole year. Miss Whitman, the district attorney has decided to press charges against your son for attempted elder abuse and fraud. The IRS has also opened a formal investigation into his business practices. And the best part? Emma has asked to be placed in your temporary custody while her parents deal with their legal issues. Honey, I couldn't stop the tears that came then, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure relief and justice and the overwhelming joy of having my granddaughter choose me over the people who tried to throw me away. Emma moved into my house the next month, not because I was lonely or needed help, but because she needed to be somewhere stable while her parents' world fell apart around them. And sweetie, having that child back in my life was like watching flowers bloom after a hard winter. She helped me set up one of those Ring doorbells with the camera, learned how to make Robert's chocolate cake recipe, and started calling me every day after school just to check in. But most importantly, she learned what family loyalty really means. Not blind obedience to people who hurt you, but standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. The legal proceedings took most of the winter. Michael eventually pled guilty to attempted elder abuse and fraud to avoid jail time, but he lost his business license and had to declare bankruptcy. Jessica filed for a divorce once she realized that being married to a convicted felon wasn't the social status she had married him for. And the house they'd been so proud of foreclosed on and sold at auction. But the sweetest justice came in the spring when Emma graduated from high school as valedictorian and announced in her speech that she was dedicating her achievement to my grandmother, who taught me that standing up for what's right is more important than keeping the peace. Y'all, I was sitting in that auditorium in my best dress, listening to my granddaughter tell hundreds of people about the importance of protecting our elders, and I felt prouder than I'd ever felt in my 73 years of life. After graduation, Emma sat me down for a serious conversation about her college plans. She'd been accepted to pre-law at Washington State University, and she wanted to specialize in elder rights advocacy. Grandma, she said, what Dad tried to do to you happens to thousands of older people every year. I want to be the lawyer who stops it from happening. If Robert could have seen his granddaughter in that moment, planning to dedicate her career to protecting people like me, I know he would have been bursting with pride. The story could end there, with justice served and family bonds rebuilt stronger than before. But honey, life has a way of adding extra chapters when you least expect them. Last month, almost a year after that disastrous birthday party, Michael showed up at my door. He looked older, thinner, and wore the kind of humility that only comes from losing everything you thought made you important. Ma, he said when I opened the door, I came to apologize, not because my lawyer told me to, not because I want anything from you, but because I owe you the truth about why I did what I did. I invited him in for coffee, not because I had forgiven him, but because I wanted to hear what he had to say for himself. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where he plotted to steal my house, and he told me about the gambling debts, the failed business deals, and the desperation that had made him think stealing from his own mother was acceptable. He said,
I convinced myself that we were helping you, and his voice was broken in a way I'd never heard before. Michael, I said when he finished, I appreciate you coming here and being honest, but apologizing doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't give me back those months of wondering if my own family was going to succeed in erasing everything I'd built. He nodded, like he'd expected as much. I know, Ma. I don't expect forgiveness. I needed you to know that I know how wrong I was. We talked for 2 hours that afternoon. Not about reconciliation or forgiveness, but about consequences and rebuilding and what it means to earn back trust that's been shattered. When he left, I didn't hug him goodbye, but I didn't slam the door either. Emma, who had been away at college, came home that weekend and asked me how I felt about seeing her father again. Honey, I told her, forgiveness isn't about pretending someone didn't hurt you. It's about deciding that their actions don't get to control your happiness anymore. Your daddy has a lot of work to do before he earns the right to be called family again, but that's his journey to make. She hugged me tight and said, Grandma, you're the strongest person I know. But the real test of strength came this past month when I got a call from Jessica's lawyer. Turns out, in the divorce settlement, Jessica had been awarded half of Michael's debts, but none of his assets since everything had been liquidated to pay for his legal troubles and restitution. She was working 3 jobs to make ends meet and living in a studio apartment across town.
The lawyer wanted to know if I'd be willing to write a character reference for Jessica's custody hearing. She was fighting to get joint custody of Emma back, and apparently my opinion carried weight with the family court judge. I thought about it for 3 days. This was the woman who called me a burden in my own home, who'd stolen my keys, who'd laughed at my tears on my birthday. This was the woman who'd helped my son plan to steal my house and put me away like unwanted furniture. But she was also Emma's mother, and Emma loved her despite everything that had happened. I wrote that letter, but not the one Jessica was hoping for. I told the court exactly what kind of mother abandons their child's grandmother to profit from elder abuse. I told him about the laughing, the key theft, and the complete lack of remorse until there were legal consequences. But I also told them that Emma deserved to have a relationship with her mother if that's what she wanted. The judge awarded Jessica supervised visitation rights and ordered her to complete parenting classes and community service at an elder care facility. When Emma told me about the ruling, she cried a little, but said she was proud of me for telling the truth, even when it was complicated. That's what integrity looks like, isn't it, Grandma? Doing the right thing even when it's hard and even when people might not understand? Y'all, raising that child has been the greatest joy of my 73 years. She's learned to cook Robert's recipes, she helps me maintain the house that Michael once tried to steal, and she calls me every single day when she's away at school. But most importantly, she's learned that family isn't about blood relations, it's about people who show up for you when life gets hard. Last week, Emma brought her boyfriend home to meet me. A nice young man studying social work who wants to help protect vulnerable populations from exploitation. When he shook my hand and said, "Miss Whitman, Emma talks about you all the time. She says you're her hero," I felt that familiar warmth in my chest that comes from knowing you've made a difference. But the real validation came yesterday when I got a call from Danny Patterson's law office. Apparently, our case had been used as precedent in 3 other elder abuse cases, and 2 families had been prosecuted based on the legal strategies we developed.
The state legislature was even considering new laws to make it harder for family members to abuse elderly relatives. Mrs. Whitman, Danny's assistant told me, your decision to fight back instead of accepting the abuse has helped protect dozens of other seniors. You should be very proud. Proud doesn't begin to cover how I felt. Vindicated, maybe. Satisfied, definitely. But mostly just grateful that my story could help other grandmothers and grandfathers who might be facing the same betrayal I had survived. This morning, as I'm telling you this story, I'm sitting in my kitchen at 1247 Maple Street, the same kitchen where this whole nightmare began 13 months ago. The house is exactly the same crown molding Michael was eyeing, same hardwood floors he wanted to cash in on, same roses blooming in the garden that Jessica thought was too much work to maintain. But everything is different too. The dining room table where they laughed at my tears now hosts Sunday dinners with Emma and her college friends, young people who actually listen when I tell stories about the old days. The bedroom they wanted to empty out and profit from is now Emma's whenever she comes home from school. And that kitchen where I heard my son plotting against me, it's where Emma and I bake Robert's chocolate cake recipe every month, teaching her friends how to make something sweet with their own hands instead of buying everything pre-made. You know what the most beautiful irony is? Michael's plan to sell my house for $400,000 would have netted him maybe $200,000 after paying off his debts and the assisted living costs. But honey, the satisfaction of keeping what's mine, of standing up for myself, of teaching my granddaughter that nobody has the right to disrespect you just because you've got some gray in your hair, that's worth more than all the money in the world. The assisted living facility in Coeur d'Alene that they wanted to dump me in, I drove past it last month when Emma and I went on a road trip to celebrate her Dean's List achievement. The parking lot was full of sad-looking visitors who came once a month out of obligation, and I saw residents sitting by the windows watching life go by without them. That could have been me, sweetie. If I hadn't fought back, if I hadn't demanded respect, if I just accepted their version of what was best for me. Instead, I'm living in my own home, surrounded by people who chose to love me rather than people who felt obligated to tolerate me. Emma's boyfriend visits every weekend now, and he always asks if there's anything I need help with around the house. Not because he thinks I'm incapable, but because he genuinely cares about my well-being. Yesterday, he fixed a loose step on my front porch and refused to let me pay him for it. Mrs. Whitman, he said, you're family now. Family helps family. That's what real family looks like, y'all. Not people who plot behind your back and laugh at your pain, but people who show up with tools and time and genuine concern for your happiness. But I'd be lying if I didn't say this whole experience changed me. I'm more careful now about who I trust, more protective of my independence, more aware of how vulnerable older people can be when their own families turn against them. I've become something of an advocate in my community, speaking at senior centers and community groups about recognizing the warning signs of elder abuse. Just last month, I helped a neighbor named Dorothy, whose son was trying to get power of attorney over her finances while she was still perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. We connected her with Danny Patterson, documented the attempted coercion, and now Dorothy's son is facing the same kind of legal consequences that Michael dealt with. Margaret, Dorothy told me after we gotten her situation resolved, I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't taught me that fighting back was an option. I thought I just had to accept whatever my children decided was best. That's the real tragedy of elder abuse, honey. So many older people have been taught to be polite, to not make trouble, to trust their families even when those families are betraying them. We've been raised to believe that keeping the peace is more important than protecting ourselves, and predators count on that conditioning.
But what I learned at 72 years old is that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to refuse to enable their worst behavior. By holding Michael accountable for his actions, by making him face legal consequences instead of just forgetting and forgetting, I may have actually saved him from becoming an even worse person. He's been in counseling now for 8 months, working on his gambling addiction and learning to manage money responsibly. He got a job at a hardware store, honest work that pays an honest wage, and he's slowly rebuilding his life without depending on other people's assets to solve his problems. Emma tells me he asks about me sometimes, wonders if there's any chance of reconciliation. I'm not ready for that conversation yet, and I may never be. But I'm glad to hear that he's getting help and that he's learned to support himself without stealing from family members. That's not forgiveness exactly, but it's something like hope that he might eventually become the kind of man his father would have been proud of.
The hardest part of this whole experience wasn't the betrayal or the legal battles or even the months of wondering if I'd lose everything I'd worked for. The hardest part was accepting that the people I'd loved and sacrificed for my entire adult life were capable of treating me like a disposable inconvenience. But you know what I learned from surviving that heartbreak? I learned that my worth isn't determined by how other people treat me. I spent 40 years working night shifts at the hospital, saving lives and comforting families in their darkest hours. I raised 3 children, buried a beloved husband, and maintained a home that was the center of our family's world for 4 decades. My value doesn't decrease just because some people fail to appreciate it. And honey, the relationships I've built in the aftermath of this crisis are deeper and more genuine than some of the family connections I was trying so hard to preserve. Emma and I have a bond now that's built on mutual respect rather than just biological obligation. Her college friends have adopted me as their honorary grandmother, calling me for advice about everything from boys to career choices to how to make a decent meatloaf. Mrs. Patterson next door and I have become genuine friends instead of just neighbors, sharing morning coffee and evening walks and the kind of companionship that comes from surviving life's storms together. Even Danny Patterson and his wife have me over for Sunday dinner sometimes, including me in their extended family because they want my company, not because they have to tolerate my presence. This is what I want every older person listening to this story to understand. You deserve relationships based on love and respect, not duty and convenience. You deserve to be valued for who you are right now, not just tolerated as a reminder of who you used to be. And you absolutely deserve to live in your own home, make your own decisions, and control your own assets for as long as you're mentally and physically capable of doing so. If someone in your family is pressuring you to give up your independence for your own good, ask yourself, who really benefits from these changes? If the answer isn't clearly and obviously you, then you might be dealing with a family member who's more interested in your assets than your welfare. Trust your instincts. Document everything and don't be afraid to seek help from professionals who specialize in elder rights. There are lawyers like Danny Patterson in every state, social workers who understand elder abuse, and law enforcement officers who take these crimes seriously. You don't have to face this alone, and you don't have to accept mistreatment just because it comes from family. The birthday cake that started this whole story is long gone. Those 72 candles burned down to nothing while I was locked out of my own home. But you know what? Last month, on my 73rd birthday, Emma surprised me with a party that filled my house with genuine love and laughter. She'd invited all the people who'd become my chosen family over the past year. Mrs. Patterson, Danny and his wife, some of Emma's college friends, even Dorothy and a few other seniors from my advocacy group. The cake was Robert's chocolate recipe, made with Emma's own hands and decorated with 73 candles that we lit together. When it came time to make a wish, I looked around at all those faces, people who were there because they wanted to celebrate me, not because they felt obligated to show up. And I made a wish for every older person who's ever felt invisible or disposable or afraid that their own family might betray them. I wish for them to find the courage to demand respect, the strength to fight back when necessary, and the wisdom to surround themselves with people who see their value instead of their vulnerabilities. When I blew out those candles, everyone cheered like I just accomplished something amazing. And maybe I had. Maybe surviving family betrayal and coming out stronger on the other side is worth celebrating. Maybe standing up for yourself at 72 and winning is an achievement that deserves recognition. As we were cleaning up after the party, Emma hugged me tight and whispered, "Grandma, thank you for teaching me that love isn't supposed to hurt, that family is supposed to protect you, not exploit you." Y'all, if that's the only lesson that comes out of this whole terrible, wonderful, life-changing experience, then every moment of pain and fear and uncertainty was worth it. Because Emma will never let anyone treat her the way Michael and Jessica treated me. She'll never tolerate abuse in the name of family loyalty, and she'll never be so desperate for approval that she accepts cruelty disguised as concern. But more than that, she'll be the kind of lawyer who fights for people like me. Older people who've worked their whole lives to build something meaningful and shouldn't have to defend it from their own children. She'll be the kind of advocate who understands that aging doesn't make you stupid, and needing help with some things doesn't mean you need help with everything. The house at 1247 Maple Street is still mine, still standing strong after all these storms. The roses Robert planted 40 years ago are blooming bigger and more beautiful than ever, and the hardwood floors Michael wanted to cash in on still shine like new when the afternoon sun hits them just right. But the most beautiful thing in this house isn't the crown molding or the garden or any of the physical things that my family tried to steal. It's the laughter that fills these rooms now, the genuine conversations around the dinner table, and the sense of peace that comes from being surrounded by people who choose to love you, rather than people who see you as a burden to be managed. Sometimes at night, when I'm sitting in Robert's old chair reading or watching the news, I think about that moment 13 months ago when I heard my son planning to betray me. I remember the shock and hurt and desperate fear that maybe they were right. Maybe I was becoming a burden. Maybe I should just accept whatever they decided was best. But then I look around at the life I've built since then. The advocacy work that's helping other seniors, the relationship with Emma that's deeper than ever, the friendships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. Honey, if you take one thing away from my story, let it be this. You are never too old to demand respect. You are never too vulnerable to fight back. And you are never so dependent on family that you have to accept abuse and silence. Your voice matters. Your choices matter. And your happiness matters just as much at 72 as it did at 32.
The knife might have been shaking in my hands when I cut that birthday cake 13 months ago, but my hands are steady now. Steady enough to sign legal documents, steady enough to write letters to legislators about elder rights, and steady enough to hug my granddaughter every time she comes home from college. Most importantly, they're steady enough to keep building the kind of life that honors everything Robert and I worked for, everything we dreamed about when we bought this house in 1978 and planned to grow old together within these walls. He didn't get to grow old with me, but his memory lives in every room of this house, in every recipe Emma learns, and in every moment when I choose courage over convenience, truth over politeness, and self-respect over family peace.
That birthday cake is long gone, but the sweetness of justice, that taste lingers forever, y'all, and it's more satisfying than any dessert you could ever imagine. The story ends where it began, in my kitchen, in my house, surrounded by the life I built and refused to let anyone else tear down. But this time, instead of tears and betrayal, there's coffee brewing and Emma's voice calling from upstairs, asking if I need help with dinner. No, thank you, sweetheart, I call back, just like I've been calling back to people who underestimated me for 73 years. Grandma's got everything under control. And honey, for the first time in longer than I can remember, that's absolutely, completely, perfectly true.